Hello and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches. I'm Teniola Shobowale. On the program this week, we focus on the crisis in Ukraine, the Russian president saying he does not want war in Europe, and how ordinary citizens have been affected by the fear of an invasion. The future of NATO, the transatlantic security alliance, is at the center of the standoff between Russia and the West over Ukraine. Moscow wants guarantees that its neighbor, a former Soviet state, will be permanently barred from joining the United States-led alliance. It has also called for NATO to cease all military activity in Eastern Europe, blaming it for undermining security in the region.
Ukraine is not a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, but has a promise dating from 2008 that it will eventually be given the opportunity to join, a step that would bring the US-led alliance to Russia's border. Moscow has denied ever planning to attack the Ukraine, but is demanding legally binding guarantees from the United States and NATO that Kyiv will not be allowed to join the military bloc. Washington and Brussels have so far refused to make such pledges. At a joint news conference after talks with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Russia's President Vladimir Putin said Ukraine's growing ties with the alliance could make it a launchpad for NATO missiles targeted at Russia. Even though Ukraine is far from even starting the membership application, President Putin insists the issue of whether Ukraine will be allowed to join NATO in the future needs to be resolved now.
We see the forceful constraint of Russia as a direct threat to our national security, and legal obligations based on our drafts are meant to ease that threat. I repeat, the answer for our security guarantee proposals given to us by the United States and NATO do not address the three fundamental Russia demands. Do we want war? Of course not. That is why we have offered our proposals to start the negotiation process, which should lead to an agreement of providing equal security for everybody, including our country.
He adds that Russia had decided to partially withdraw troops from near Ukraine and saw some room for further discussion with the West on Moscow's security demands. The reported partial withdrawal runs counter to warnings from the United States and Britain that Russia may be poised to invade Ukraine at any time. While the development raises hopes that tensions could ease, military exercises continue and it's unclear how many units are being withdrawn.
At this time, we are still noting that there are approximately 100,000 Russian troops at the Ukrainian border, including in Belarus. We look forward to seeing evidence of the withdrawal of troops on Russia's part, but we need to prepare for any eventuality with that significant escalation of Russian troops that we have seen over the last weeks and months.
NATO says Russia needs to show credible and meaningful de-escalation.
There are signs from Moscow that diplomacy should continue. This gives grounds for cautious optimism. But so far, we have not seen any sign of de-escalation on the ground. Russia has amassed a fighting force in and around Ukraine, unprecedented since the Cold War. Everything is now in place for a new attack. But Russia still has time to step back from the brink, stop preparing for war, and start working for a peaceful solution.
I think de-escalation is exactly that, and that means moving those troops, moving your force posture away from Ukraine's border, out of Ukraine. We've seen up to 30,000 troops moving into Belarus. Obviously, we would have to see much of that force posture shift for us to feel reassured about de-escalation.
US President Joe Biden on Tuesday made an impassioned appeal to Russian President Vladimir Putin to step back from war with Ukraine, saying NATO is not a threat and diplomacy is still an option.
The fact remains, right now, Russia has more than 150,000 troops encircling Ukraine and Belarus and along Ukraine's border. An invasion remains distinctly possible. The United States and NATO are not a threat to Russia. Ukraine is not threatening Russia. Neither the U.S. nor NATO have missiles in Ukraine. We do not have plans to put them there as well. We're not targeting the people of Russia. We do not seek to destabilize Russia. To the citizens of Russia, you are not our enemy. We are not seeking direct confrontation with Russia, though I've been clear that if Russia targets Americans in Ukraine, we will respond forcefully. And if Russia attacks the United States or our allies through asymmetric means, like disruptive cyber attacks against our companies or critical infrastructure, we are prepared to respond. If Russia does invade in the days and weeks ahead, the human cost for Ukraine will be immense. And the strategic cost for Russia will also be immense. If Russia attacks Ukraine, it'll be met with overwhelming international condemnation. The world will not forget that Russia chose needless death and destruction. Invading Ukraine will prove to be a self-inflicted wound. The United States and our allies and partners will respond decisively.
Meanwhile, many Ukrainians have mixed opinions on the divisive issue of the country's NATO membership. If Ukraine says it must be in NATO, then Ukraine should be in NATO. Peace in Ukraine should not depend on whether Ukraine is in NATO or not.
The idea that we could potentially give up the goal of joining NATO just because Russia invades us is simply nonsense. Russia had attacked us in the past when, according to our constitution, we were a non-aligned state. That's why I don't see any point in giving up on the goal of joining NATO.
Many countries have already stated their opinion on Ukraine joining NATO clearly and precisely. Basically, it's not exactly like they're eagerly awaiting us there. That's why we should focus on better things, like the development of our economy. We should grow our economy to become interesting and attractive to our Western partners.
Despite Russia's opposition and some Western countries' skepticism, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky affirmed on Monday that the country will continue to pursue NATO membership. For now, more diplomatic talks to de-escalate tensions over Ukraine are planned between Russia and other countries.
Meanwhile, despite recent fears of Russia's military buildup, residents of the Ukrainian capital Kyiv remain mostly calm, carrying on with their lives as normal. Many say they have nowhere else to go.
The streets of Kyiv remain busy with people shopping, families taking a stroll or meeting friends. Although Western leaders urged their citizens to leave the country immediately over the past weekend, there were no signs of panic buying or mass exodus from the city.
I'm cool about the whole situation, the evacuation. Every country has to take care of its citizens and do everything possible to secure their safety. Be it America or Ukraine, everybody does what needs to be done. But we live normally, just like before. We have not made any preparations for anything extraordinary. Where would we go? We will stay here and we will defend ourselves.
However, some residents say they are planning to leave Kyiv and temporarily live outside the capital.
We as a family are going to split. My wife is going to go to southeastern Ukraine to study with her mom. I'm going to move in with my mother in a village outside Kyiv, just in case. I think the probability of an invasion is very high, so we're getting ready.
We decided on Friday night, after the US and the UK advice came out to leave Kyiv, we decided that at least we needed to get to a safer area within Ukraine, at the very minimum. Whether it meant leaving the country or not, we will decide as we see how the situation unfolds. That was what drove our decision, not really fear, just practicality. That we need to at least have a plan in place to get out of Ukraine. For now, we're treating this like a 2-week vacation in West Ukraine and see what happens.
Meanwhile, at Kyiv's Borispil airport, there were no signs of mass exodus from Ukraine after the United States and its allies said the Russian invasion, including a possible air assault, could occur any time.
I don't see anyone in fear in Ukraine. Everyone is just getting on with their life. There's still people going out, drinking, socializing. We were in the gym yesterday having a workout. Everything seems to be absolutely fine.
There is a tension, so you never know what will happen. but right now for me it's quiet.
Moscow has denied ever planning to attack the Ukraine, but is demanding legally binding guarantees from the United States and NATO that Kyiv will not be allowed to join the military bloc.
Now let's meet Yulia, a citizen in Ukraine's Odessa, preparing for whatever may come as part of the Territorial Defense Force as Russia's Navy holds drills not far from the region.
Businesswoman Yulia has spent her weekend, as every other in recent months, at a World War II memorial holding a mock wooden rifle. The memorial commemorates miners from the Donbass region who were sent to defend the port town of Odessa against the Nazi invasion in 1941. Yulia, along with many other citizens, are training for a similar scenario. As Russia's Navy holds drills not far from Odessa's bay, she says its military buildup along the borders with Ukraine first made her realize she needed to prepare for whatever would come.
I don't have any experience in sports, let alone in martial arts or something like this. I'm a very peaceful person, and my everyday life skills include cooking and so on. But now I understand that we might have to stand against well-prepared people. And whatever the outcome, in order to resist these people, I must be trained at least a little bit.
Her instructor says the territorial defense volunteers are being trained to counter possible sabotage maneuvers.
The territorial defense forces can surely be included in street patrols or in defending critical infrastructure. In the Odessa region, there are many critical infrastructure sites here.
The Ukrainian region of Odessa is strategically important. If a war erupts, Russia could move to conquer Odessa, cutting off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. About 70% of Ukraine's trade is conducted by sea, and Odessa's regional ports comprise roughly 3/4 of that. Without Odessa, Kyiv would be largely isolated from international markets. Over 30 ships from the Russian Black Sea Fleet recently started training exercises near the Crimean Peninsula as part of wider Navy drills.
Ukrainian Army veteran Dmytro Dovzhenko has been living in Poland since 2019, but he still wears a large ring with the inscription "Loyal Forever" from his military unit back home. He says if Russia were to invade Ukraine, he wants to be ready to fight as quickly as possible.
Ukrainian Army veteran Dmytro Dovzhenko has been living in Poland with his wife and 2 children since 2019. He runs a business there that handles anything from hairdressing to food, but the situation back home is never far from his mind. He says if Russia were to invade his home country, he wants to be ready to fight as quickly as possible.
If there's a war, a battle, I'm going to go back to my military units. According to the army law, I have 24 hours for that, and I only need 24 hours. Within 24 hours, I'm back in the military.
Dovzhenko runs a foundation of Ukrainian veterans across the European Union. He says he's one of an estimated 700 soldiers in Poland who would be ready to return home and take up arms. Dovzhenko and fellow veteran Sergei Sklarenko believe that as there are 10,000 Ukrainian veterans across the EU, the number of those ready to re-enlist is much higher, likely closer to 7,000.
Ukraine is always in us, in our hearts, in our souls, in our minds, and if needed, we will go back. We will go back fast. We will be able to give back even more of our professionalism, our experience this time.
Showing pictures from their military days, they say the Ukrainian army is far better equipped for war now than it was 8 years ago, when it fought separatists in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions after Russia annexed Crimea.
First of all, the Ukrainian army isn't like what it was in 2014. Back then, we didn't have anything. In 2015, we got uniforms, and the quality got a bit better. Now we have modern weapons, modern medicine. We have everything that we need. And most importantly, we have experienced people.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Veterans say that there are no statistics on how many veterans from the conflict that started in 2014 are abroad, but there are 420,000 people registered as having once defended Ukraine.
When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, we step into the iconic home of South Africa's first black president, Nelson Mandela, as it opens up as a luxury hotel. Thanks for staying with us on the program. So the situation in East Africa. Once-in-a-generation floods have left scrubland in northern Kenya littered with the carcasses of goats and sheep, and the herders who depend on them struggling to eat. In just one area of Marsabit County, herders lost around 2,000 goats and sheep recently after heavy rainfall.
Carcasses of goats and sheep litter the scrubland of northern Kenya. This devastation has been wrought by once-in-a-generation flood. Torrential rains were accompanied by colder than normal temperatures and sharp winds ripping through the normally semi-arid grazing land. Herder Guyu Gufu lost all his 350 goats.
First of all, these goats were my only means of survival. I have camels, but I don't know where they are. I don't know if they are dead or alive.
The Kenyan Meteorological Department said parts of the Marsabit County experienced 90 millimeters of rain in just one day. The last time the area was hit by similar rains was 1998, according to Roba Koto, the top official in North Hall constituency. After the storm and flood came a drought which weakened livestock.
The percentage number of animals that have succumbed as a result of drought, we made an assessment, is almost 40%. The remaining balance, 90% of the remaining balance have succumbed to this rainfall. The nomads on this end, livestock is their backbone. Livestock is their mainstay. This is the only activity they are engaged in. I am sure with the death of all these animals, it is going to be a very difficult life for this nomad.
The drought had already made the animals unsellable and left more than 2 million people in the region struggling to eat. U.S. government agency, the Famine Early Warning Systems Network, said it was the third straight season of poor rains in eastern and northern Kenya, where grazing is a main source of income.
What is particularly striking about this drought is its breadth. Livestock are dying, and that is devastating for pastoral families. Unable to find pasture, and with fodder out of reach of many, pastoralists have watched their livestock die. After 3 consecutive failed rainy seasons, harvests are up to 70% below the norm in affected areas. Now, food and water prices are skyrocketing significantly. This is affecting families' ability to buy. Staple cereal prices have risen between 3 to 5-fold above typical levels in several markets. Rising cereal prices and declining livestock prices means a sharp decline in the terms of trade.
Experts say climate change is expected to increase the frequency and severity of such droughts.
On a lighter note, let's meet a 55-year-old senior police superintendent who teaches music to a children's band. He says teaching the children allows him to connect with the community, which sometimes yields tips on crimes, but mostly he does it for the youngsters.
It's an unusual sight in Kenya, where police frequently make the headlines for extrajudicial executions, corruption and crackdowns on protesters. As he zealously conducts a Kenyan children's band, Salasio Murithi wears a broad dimpled green and his Kenyan police uniform.
Here I write musical notes in letters. So you can see I can tell them to play B, A, G, C, D, something like that. And I write them on the board. When I write them on the board, they play the notes since they know the fingerings. Most of the things I'm doing here is to teach them fingerings.
The 55-year-old senior police superintendent, Murithi, says teaching children allows him to connect with the community, which then sometimes yields tips on crimes, but mostly he does it for the children.
I'm very happy to see I have developed and have given children something extra to do. The only sad part of it, they cannot march and go and play music outside, but we can make some performances. In future, we can try and see whether we can have some performances and play to other schools.
The school in the western Kenyan town of Endebess teaches students with disabilities. Murithi has always had an affinity for music and for decades played the saxophone in the police band. But 3 years ago, he realized he wanted to share his musical talent with the members of his community most in need.
This is the third year, but if need be, I would talk to my boss. I have only 3 years to go, then I retire. I would talk to my boss and ask him, please, let me be there and teach the children, and maybe if I can get some two teachers who I can teach music, so that they can be teaching music when I live here.
Head teacher Eliud Kipsang says students at St. Lillian are happier and more expressive since Murithi started teaching, and his presence has shifted their perceptions of police.
It's an improvement since he came. There's a lot of friendship. The learners are willing to talk to a policeman. The officer here, Mr. Saleh, he never wears uniform. Today he has put it on the uniform, but he normally comes in civilians. So whenever learners see such an officer in civilian clothes, they are free to talk, they are free to interact. They allow the learners to touch his instruments.
Murithi has 3 more years in his post, but is already trying to figure out a way to keep teaching and connecting with children at St. Lillian.
Looking for a chance to walk in the footsteps of Nelson Mandela? Well, look no further than Sanctuary Mandela, a former residence of South Africa's late president in Johannesburg, which has now been turned into a boutique hotel. Opened in September, the hotel promises guests a blend of tranquility, heritage and mindful experiences, including a fine dining restaurant that serves dishes inspired by Mandela's favorite meals. Let's take a look.
This was Nelson Mandela's home in Johannesburg, and now you can be a guest at the property. It has been transformed into a luxury hotel. Sanctuary Mandela, as it's now called, was the anti-apartheid leader's first home in the South African city after being released from his 27-year-long imprisonment. He lived on the premises between 1992 and 1998 and hosted the likes of Bill Clinton and supermodel Naomi Campbell. Guests in the hotel can also taste meals inspired by Mandela's favorite dishes. And one of those preparing these dishes is Soliswa, who has cooked for Mandela and his family for over 22 years.
You couldn't go wrong with that when you give him vegetables, but it must be a variety of vegetables because he will tell you that put color, there must be color of the vegetables on the plate. Then he loved and he liked very much oxtail stew, of which now right now here we are having a ravioli taken from the oxtail stew. So we made it a ravioli. So that one, 3 days in a week you must have oxtail in his house with sam and beans, that is umusho in our language.
Surrounded by lush gardens, the property has 9 rooms that can accommodate a total of 18 guests. The walls are covered in memorabilia, paying tribute to the global icon.
The place is divine. Whoever came with this concept, I wouldn't have thought something like this, and everything is beautiful. The people, the service you receive here, everything is just to the tops. And yeah, as she said, the feeling, it's like you could feel Mandela's presence somehow in this place. And as I was going around the tour, you know what, I could feel a sense something that this man, you know, even though he passed on, but he still lives, he's still around us.
Room rates vary from over $260 a night to nearly $1,000 for the presidential suite, which was Mandela's bedroom during his presidential term.
Well, this is where we say goodbye till next time, but remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Bye for now.